Have you ever watched someone die, and then witnessed something that no doctor, no machine, and no amount of human knowledge could explain? What if I told you that inside one of the most advanced hospitals in Saudi Arabia, a respected royal prince lay unconscious after his heart stopped, and while doctors prepared his family for the worst, something supernatural happened that would leave surgeons weeping, nurses trembling, and an entire hospital questioning everything they thought they knew about life and death? This is not just a story about survival. This is a story about hope when all hope is gone. A story about heaven touching earth. A story about a man who crossed the boundary between life and death, and came back with a message that changed an entire family forever. And before we begin, if you believe Jesus still changes lives today, take a moment to subscribe and join this growing family of faith. And stay with me until the end, because what happened next completely changed everything. Also, family, I would love to know where you're watching from today. Take a moment and comment your country and the exact time you're listening. We are a global family of believers, and your comments help us pray for one another around the world. Now let me take you to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A city of wealth. A city of influence. A city where power opens doors most people will never even see. And at the center of this story stood a man who seemed to have everything. His name was Prince Abdullah Al Saud. To the outside world, he looked untouchable, respected, honored, influential, a trusted royal advisor, a renowned Islamic scholar, a man whose words carried weight among princes, ministers, and religious leaders. People waited hours to meet him. Government officials sought his counsel. Television networks invited him to speak. Many considered him one of the most respected religious voices in the kingdom. But there was something nobody knew. Something hidden beneath the titles. Something hidden beneath the wealth. Something hidden beneath the honor. Because even though Prince Abdullah possessed everything this world could offer, his heart carried questions that nobody could answer. Questions he rarely spoke aloud. Questions about eternity. Questions about purpose. Questions about God. Questions that would soon become more important than anything he had ever achieved. But nobody knew that yet. Not his family. Not his colleagues. Not even his son, Khalid. Because the night everything changed arrived suddenly. Without warning. Without preparation. And when it came, it shook an entire family to its core. It was just after midnight. The royal residence in Riyadh stood quiet beneath the darkness. The halls were peaceful. The servants had retired to their quarters. Security teams maintained their normal patrols. Everything seemed ordinary, until a scream shattered the silence. A scream so filled with terror that it instantly awakened everyone inside the palace. Khalid remembers that moment as if it happened yesterday. The sound echoed through the marble corridors. He jumped from his bed, his heart racing, his mind confused. For a split second, he thought someone had broken into the palace. Then he recognized the voice. It was his mother. And there was something in her scream he had never heard before. Fear. Pure fear. Khalid ran. Down the hallway. Past family portraits. Past ornate chandeliers. Past servants rushing in confusion. Every second felt longer than the one before. Then he reached his father's private prayer room. And what he saw stopped him in his tracks. Prince Abdullah lay motionless on the floor. Face down. Beside his prayer mat. One hand clutched tightly against his chest. His body completely still. His mother knelt beside him crying uncontrollably. Trying desperately to wake him, calling his name again and again. But there was no response, no movement, no answer, only silence. The kind of silence that terrifies every family member who has ever stood beside a loved one in crisis. For a moment, Khalid couldn't move. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to his father. Not to a man so strong. Not to a man so respected. not to someone who seemed larger than life. But reality doesn't ask permission before it arrives. Within minutes, emergency teams flooded the residence. Doctors rushed into the room carrying equipment. Security personnel cleared hallways. Servants stood frozen in fear. The atmosphere transformed from peaceful calm into complete chaos. One physician checked Prince Abdullah's pulse, then immediately looked at another doctor. The expression on his face said everything. Something was terribly wrong. Medical equipment appeared. Oxygen tanks arrived. Emergency procedures began. Doctors worked frantically. Instructions filled the room. Machines beeped. Shock paddles discharged. Prayers were whispered. Tears flowed. And through it all, Khalid stood frozen. Watching. Waiting. Praying. Hoping. But with every passing minute, fear grew heavier. Because despite every effort, his father wasn't responding. Then came the moment that changed everything. A doctor quietly pulled another physician aside. Their voices were low. But Khalid overheard enough. The prince's heart had stopped. Too much time had passed before intervention. The situation was critical. Dangerously critical. Those words hit like a hammer. Suddenly, all the wealth in the world seemed meaningless. All the influence. All the connections. All the status. None of it mattered. Because when death enters the room, money loses its power. Titles lose their power. Influence loses its power. And every human being is reminded of one unavoidable truth. Life is fragile. The decision was made immediately. Prince Abdullah needed to be transferred to one of the most advanced hospitals in Riyadh. Time was running out. An armored ambulance waited outside. Rain had begun falling over the city. The flashing emergency lights reflected against the wet streets. Inside the vehicle, doctors continued fighting to save his life. Machines monitored every heartbeat, every breath, every vital sign, and none of the readings looked encouraging. Khalid sat nearby staring at the monitor, listening to each weak beep. Each sound felt like a countdown, as though time itself were slipping away. His mother sat beside her husband holding his hand, praying, weeping, refusing to let go. And somewhere in the middle of that desperate journey through the rainy streets of Riyadh, something began unfolding that nobody could yet understand. Because while doctors fought to save Prince Abdullah's body, God was preparing to do something far greater. Something no medical textbook could explain. Something that would soon leave an entire hospital speechless. And when they finally arrived at the hospital, the real story was only beginning. The moment the ambulance doors opened, a team of specialists rushed toward Prince Abdullah. Bright hospital lights flooded the emergency entrance. Doctors shouted instructions. Nurses moved rapidly beside the rolling stretcher. Machines beeped urgently. Everything happened so fast that Khalid could barely process what was unfolding. One moment he was inside the ambulance praying his father would survive the journey. The next moment he was standing outside the intensive care unit, watching doctors disappear behind sealed ICU doors. Then the waiting began. And anyone who has ever sat outside a hospital room knows that sometimes waiting can feel harder than the crisis itself. Minutes feel like hours. Hours feel like days. Every opening door causes your heart to jump. Every doctor walking toward you becomes a source of hope, or fear. Khalid paced the hallway. His mother sat silently in a chair, clutching prayer beads with trembling hands. Relatives continued arriving. Security guards quietly filled the corridors. Word was spreading. A respected royal advisor was fighting for his life. Inside the ICU, more than 10 specialists worked tirelessly. Outside, his family could do nothing except wait. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the chief surgeon emerged. The expression on his face instantly told them this was not good news. Very slowly, he approached. His shoulders looked heavy. His eyes looked tired. And then he delivered words that struck the family like a thunderbolt. "Your father may not survive the night." The hallway became silent. Completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. For a moment, it felt as though the entire world had stopped. Khalid stared at the doctor, waiting for him to say something more encouraging, something hopeful, something reassuring. But it never came. The surgeon explained that Prince Abdullah's heart had stopped for too long. Critical oxygen loss had affected multiple organs. Brain activity was extremely weak. Even if he somehow survived, the chances of a full recovery were almost non-existent. Medical science had done everything possible. Now there was very little left to do. The words felt unbearable. For the first time in his life, Khalid watched highly trained medical experts admit defeat. The strongest treatments, the most advanced equipment, the best specialists. None of it seemed enough. As dawn approached, the atmosphere grew even heavier. More relatives arrived. Important religious leaders visited. Government officials quietly checked on the situation. But despite all the attention surrounding the royal family, the reality remained unchanged. Prince Abdullah lay unconscious, connected to machines, caught somewhere between life and death. Hours passed. No improvement. No encouraging reports. Only silence. Only waiting. Only fear. Then something happened. Something small at first. So small that most people would have missed it. Khalid's mother slowly stood from her chair. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her face looked exhausted. But there was a determination in her expression now. A quiet faith. A refusal to surrender completely. With permission from the medical staff, she entered the ICU. Khalid followed behind her. The room felt cold. Machines surrounded the bed. Monitors glowed softly. The steady sounds of medical equipment filled the silence. Prince Abdullah looked fragile. Nothing like the powerful man the world knew. His wife leaned close, placed her hand gently on his, and whispered into his ear. "The God who created life can still breathe life again." Simple words. Quiet words. Words almost nobody else heard. But moments later, something began changing. At first it seemed insignificant. A nurse paused. Then another. Several staff members exchanged confused looks. The room suddenly felt different. Warmer. Not physically warmer. Something else. A strange peace. A strange presence. Difficult to describe. Impossible to measure. Yet everyone could feel it. The tension that had filled the room for hours seemed to lift slightly. Then one nurse gasped. Her eyes widened. She pointed toward the bed. Everyone turned. Prince Abdullah's lips were moving. Very slightly. Very slowly. The doctors rushed closer. Expecting involuntary muscle reactions. Expecting random neurological responses. Expecting anything except what happened next. A whisper escaped his lips. The room froze. The whisper grew stronger. Words began forming. But not in Arabic. Not in English. Not in any language anyone present recognized. The sounds flowed steadily, beautifully, powerfully, almost like a song. Doctors stared in disbelief. Nurses exchanged frightened glances. The unconscious man they believed was nearing death was speaking, and no one understood how. The strange language continued. Longer, stronger, clearer. Then something even more shocking happened. The heart monitor changed. The irregular rhythm disappeared. The unstable readings stabilized. The warning alarms stopped. A perfectly normal heartbeat appeared on the screen. One doctor immediately assumed equipment failure. Another demanded fresh scans. Several specialists rushed toward the machines. Nobody could explain what they were seeing. The numbers simply didn't make sense. The man who had been slipping away was suddenly improving. Rapidly. Inexplicably. And while doctors scrambled for answers, tears slowly rolled down Prince Abdullah's closed eyes. The room stood frozen. No one knew what to say. No one knew what to think. And then the lights flickered. Only for a moment. But it was enough. Fear spread across the ICU. Something extraordinary was happening. And everyone knew it. Minutes later, the mysterious language stopped. Silence returned. The room waited. Watching. Holding its breath. Then Prince Abdullah slowly opened his eyes. A collective gasp filled the ICU. Doctors stepped closer. Nurses stared. Family members cried openly. Against every prediction. Against every medical expectation. Against every expert opinion. He was awake. But what he said next would shock the hospital even more than his recovery. His eyes filled with tears. He looked upward. And whispered softly, "I saw the man in white." The room became completely silent. No one interrupted him. No one moved. Everyone listened. Prince Abdullah explained that while his body lay unconscious, he found himself standing beside a river unlike anything on earth. A river filled with light. A place filled with peace. No pain. No fear. No darkness. Only overwhelming love. Then he described a radiant figure dressed in white. A figure whose presence carried both compassion and authority. As he spoke, tears streamed down his face. He explained that simply standing before this figure exposed every hidden part of his heart. Every secret. Every fear. Every prideful thought. Every hidden struggle. Nothing remained concealed. Yet instead of condemnation, he experienced mercy, love, truth, grace. The doctors listened in stunned silence. Some looked skeptical. Others looked deeply unsettled. But Prince Abdullah continued. The man in white told him that his earthly assignment was not finished. That he must return. That people needed to hear a message. A message about eternity. A message about truth. A message about hope. And then came the moment that changed the atmosphere completely. Prince Abdullah looked directly at one of the senior physicians. Dr. Karim. A highly respected cardiologist. A man known for professionalism and emotional control. Prince Abdullah began revealing deeply personal details about the doctor's private life. Details no stranger could possibly know. Hidden struggles. Family pain. Sleepless nights. Private conversations. Secret fears. As the words continued, the color drained from Dr. Karim's face. His composure vanished. His eyes filled with tears. Then the respected physician broke down completely. Right there in the ICU. The doctor who spent years helping others suddenly found himself weeping openly. Several nurses began crying too. Because they knew something impossible was happening. The room had become more than a hospital room. It had become a place of encounter. A place where hidden wounds were being exposed. A place where broken hearts were being touched. And it was only the beginning. Fresh scans soon arrived. Doctors reviewed them. Then reviewed them again. And again. The results were impossible. Brain swelling had reduced dramatically. Organ function had improved. Heart performance was stabilizing. Every report contradicted the earlier diagnosis. Several specialists believed mistakes had been made. Others assumed technical errors. But repeated testing produced the same results. Prince Abdullah was recovering. Rapidly. Miraculously. In ways medicine could not explain. Outside the ICU, rumors spread through the hospital. Staff gathered in hallways. Patients' families whispered. Security struggled to control growing crowds. People sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding. Then another emotional moment occurred. A hospital cleaner entered the room. An elderly woman named Fatima. The instant she stepped inside, she froze. Her eyes widened. Tears filled her face. She pointed toward an empty corner of the room and whispered, "He's standing there." Everyone turned. No one saw what she claimed to see. But Fatima insisted a man dressed in white stood beside the bed, watching peacefully. The room fell silent once again, because moments later she revealed something remarkable. Years earlier, during one of the darkest seasons of her life, she had dreamed about a shining figure beside a river of light. The description matched exactly what Prince Abdullah had described. Every detail. The river, the light, the white garments, the overwhelming peace. Fear mixed with wonder. Questions filled every mind. And still no one had answers. Only one thing was becoming clear. This story was bigger than medicine, bigger than science, bigger than human understanding. Something eternal had touched an ICU room in Riyadh, and before sunrise, even more lives would be transformed. The sun had not yet fully risen over Riyadh, but inside the hospital, it felt as though an entirely different kind of light had entered the building. The atmosphere had changed. Only hours earlier, fear had dominated every hallway. Doctors had spoken of death. Family members had prepared for loss. Machines had been the only thing keeping Prince Abdullah alive. But now, something nobody could explain was unfolding before hundreds of witnesses. And the greatest miracles were still ahead. As word spread through the hospital, people from different departments began gathering quietly near the ICU corridor. Nurses found reasons to walk past the royal ward. Doctors checked reports repeatedly, hoping to find a medical explanation. Hospital workers whispered among themselves. Some were skeptical. Some were curious. Others were deeply afraid. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing. Something extraordinary had happened. Inside the ICU, Prince Abdullah continued recovering at a speed that stunned the medical staff. His strength increased. His breathing improved. His awareness became sharper. And yet what impacted people most was not his physical recovery. It was the peace radiating from him. The same man who had once carried the weight of influence, power, and public expectations now seemed different. Humbled. Broken before God. Filled with compassion. Filled with gratitude. Filled with a joy that could not be explained by circumstances. Then another moment unfolded that nobody expected. A young nurse named Youssef entered the room carrying medication. At first, everything appeared normal. But as he approached the bed, his face suddenly changed. His hands began trembling. The tray slipped from his fingers. Medical supplies scattered across the floor. Everyone looked toward him. His eyes filled with tears. For several seconds he couldn't speak. Then, with a broken voice, he began confessing something he had hidden from everyone. Months of depression. Months of hopelessness. Months of pretending to be okay. His father had died. Financial pressures had overwhelmed his family. The emotional burden had become unbearable. And behind his professional smile, he had secretly decided to end his life. The room became silent. Several nurses immediately began crying. Doctors looked stunned. Youssef admitted that before the miracle began, he had entered the ICU alone during his shift. Not to pray for Prince Abdullah. To pray for himself. Desperate. Broken. Empty. He had asked God for one reason to keep living. Just one. Then he described feeling a peace enter the room unlike anything he had ever experienced. A peace that stopped him from carrying out his plans. A peace that gave him hope again. When Prince Abdullah reached out his hand and softly said, "The man in white has not forgotten you," the young nurse collapsed into tears. The ICU became filled with emotion. People were no longer simply watching a recovery. They were witnessing lives being changed. One by one. Heart by heart. Then came another powerful encounter. A security guard named Farouk stood quietly near the doorway. A strong man. A disciplined man. A man trained to hide emotion. Yet tears streamed down his face. When Prince Abdullah looked toward him, the guard immediately lowered his head. The prince gently revealed that he sensed deep grief in the man's heart. The moment those words were spoken, Farouk broke down completely. Through sobs, he revealed that only days earlier he had buried his young daughter. His world had collapsed. His faith had shattered. His prayers had turned into anger. And for the first time in his life, he had begun believing that God no longer cared. As he spoke, the entire hallway became silent. Nurses cried. Visitors wiped away tears. Doctors listened carefully. Then Prince Abdullah shared a message that would stay with Farouk forever. He told him that suffering is not proof that God has abandoned us. Sometimes the darkest valleys become the places where God meets us most deeply. Farouk wept openly. Years of strength. Years of control. Years of bottled-up pain. All of it poured out. And in that moment, hope began returning to a broken father's heart. The emotional impact spread throughout the hospital. Doctors who had spent their careers trusting only what they could measure found themselves questioning things they had never considered before. Nurses who had grown accustomed to tragedy suddenly witnessed hope where none should exist. Families waiting beside sick loved ones found encouragement. Patients asked questions. Conversations about faith began appearing everywhere. It was as though one hospital room had become the center of something much bigger. Something eternal. By midday, reporters had gathered outside the hospital. News had leaked. Rumors spread across Riyadh. A royal prince had survived against impossible odds. Medical records appeared to contradict every expectation. Hospital staff whispered about strange events. The story continued growing. But for Prince Abdullah, none of that mattered anymore. His focus had changed completely. The man who once advised powerful leaders now spent his time speaking about humility, about mercy, about forgiveness, about eternity, about Jesus. During the following days, his recovery continued astonishing doctors. More tests were performed. More evaluations were conducted. More specialists reviewed the case. Again and again, the conclusion remained the same. They had no explanation. Many tried to find one. Some suggested unusual recovery patterns. Others proposed rare medical possibilities. But even those explanations failed to account for everything witnesses had experienced. Especially what happened inside that ICU room. Especially the lives that had been transformed. Especially the hope that had appeared where despair once ruled. Eventually, Prince Abdullah was discharged. The day he left the hospital felt different. Doctors who normally maintained professional distance embraced him. Nurses cried. Staff members lined the hallway. Some simply wanted to say goodbye. Others wanted to thank him. Not because he was royalty. Because something had happened through his story that touched their hearts. But the greatest transformation occurred inside his own family. At home, conversations continued late into the night. Questions were asked. Scriptures were studied. Truth was sought sincerely. No cameras. No crowds. No publicity. Just a family searching for answers. Khalid often sat awake replaying everything he had witnessed. The emergency. The diagnosis. The supernatural recovery. The encounters. The peace. The message. Nothing about it felt ordinary. Nothing about it could be ignored. His mother experienced deep change as well. So did his sisters. Again and again, they found themselves returning to one unavoidable conclusion. Jesus had met them in the middle of their crisis. Not through religion. Not through tradition. But through a personal encounter that transformed their hearts. Weeks later, after prayer, searching, and many difficult conversations, the family made a life-changing decision. Quietly. Privately. Sincerely. They chose to follow Christ. They knew the cost. They understood the risks. They understood the attention their family name carried. But they could no longer deny what they had experienced. The peace was real. The transformation was real. The hope was real. And the Jesus they had encountered was real. Years have passed since that unforgettable night. Yet Khalid still remembers every detail. The sound of the emergency alarms. The fear in the hospital hallway. The tears on his mother's face. The hopeless diagnosis. The impossible recovery. The doctors standing speechless. The broken people finding hope. And most of all, the message that emerged from the darkness. A message he now shares wherever he can. Because life is fragile. Far more fragile than most people realize. One phone call can change everything. One diagnosis can change everything. One unexpected moment can change everything. Many people spend years pursuing wealth, status, success, recognition, yet never stop to ask the most important questions. Why am I here? What happens after death? Do I truly know God? The truth is that none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. Not kings. Not princes. Not doctors. Not pastors. Not politicians. Not ordinary people. Every heartbeat is a gift. Every breath is mercy. Every day is an opportunity to seek God while He may be found. Maybe you're watching this today while carrying fear. Maybe you're facing sickness. Maybe you're battling depression. Maybe you're grieving someone you lost. Maybe you've been disappointed by life. Maybe you've been disappointed by religion. Maybe you've even been disappointed by people who claimed to represent God. But hear this clearly. Your story is not over. Your pain is not invisible. Your tears are not wasted. Your prayers are not unheard. The same Jesus who met a dying prince in a hospital room still changes lives today. The same Jesus who brought hope into despair still brings hope today. The same Jesus who heals hearts, restores faith, and transforms lives is still working today. Do not give up. Do not surrender to hopelessness. Do not believe the lie that your situation is beyond redemption. Sometimes God does His greatest work in the moments that seem most impossible. Sometimes the darkest room becomes the birthplace of a miracle. Sometimes the end we fear becomes the beginning of a testimony. And if God could bring life into a hospital room filled with hopelessness, He can bring hope into your situation too. Family, if this testimony touched your heart, I want you to do something right now. Write your prayer request in the comments. Our community loves praying for one another. And no matter what battle you're facing, you do not have to face it alone. Also tell us where you're watching from. We would love to pray for your nation, your city, and your family. If God has ever answered a prayer in your life, share your testimony below. Your story may become the encouragement someone else desperately needs today. And if this testimony strengthened your faith, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to become part of this growing family of believers around the world. Remember, God is still working. Miracles still happen. Jesus still changes lives. And no situation is too difficult for Him. Until next time, stay strong in faith, keep seeking God with all your heart, and never stop believing that He can do the impossible. God bless you.